It seems appropriate to me that the same week in which Gianforte was elected ended with yet another bombshell political report. We've been a lot of those lately. This one on the front page of the Washington Post. While some are training their grit and guns on the press, not since Watergate has the media played such a vitally important watchdog role. So, is the media biased? That's the go-to in American politics. People all across the spectrum love to holler about being treated poorly because of a slant against them. Well, guess what? A new study has found that there is media bias. It's not what you might think, not pro-liberal, not pro-conservative. It's pro-negativity. That's the fascinating finding of a Harvard study from the Shorenstein Center of the Kennedy School of Government. And in an interesting twist, people are using even this study to suit their own agendas. Consider that back on May 5th, Fox News host Tucker Carlson trashed a study from Shorenstein that had been done on the general election coverage, saying he didn't trust the source. Watch this.
These independent studies are done by political hacks posing as journalists. The Shorenstein Center, I mean, I am a journalist. I sort of know the people who work there. And you're not going to tell me, because, again, I know them, that they're politically independent, because they're not.
These political hacks at Shorenstein. Well, 2 weeks later, Shorenstein released a new study about the media's treatment of Trump. Exact same place, same professor, same staff, same methodology. This time, Carlson was now praising their accuracy because this time he agreed.
But exactly how liberal and how biased is the press? Well, for the answer to that, we'd have to go to social science. And now, for the first time in a while, we actually have some real data. A new study from researchers at Harvard University looked at 10 major news outlets and found the overwhelming majority of their coverage of the new administration's first 100 days was hostile.
Yes, thank God for social science. Joining me now, the author of the study, Thomas Patterson. He's professor of government and the press at the Shorenstein Center at Harvard's Kennedy School. Professor, I want to talk about the presidential race and then the first 100 days. The coverage of both major candidates was incredibly negative. 62% of the time for Hillary, it was negative. 56% of the time for Trump, it was negative. You point out that there was not a single week when it reached into positive territory. Explain.
Well, I think the bias of the press is a negative bias. And, you know, I think the reason that Tucker Carlson didn't like our first study is that it showed that Hillary Clinton had more negative coverage than Donald Trump during the election. And, but the point was that, you know, the press, when it looks at the political world, picks up what's going wrong rather than what's going right. If you look at the last 8 presidential elections and look at the coverage of the presidential nominees, there's only one of those nominees who received, on balance, positive coverage during the general election, and that was Barack Obama in 2008.
I have a graph that displays what you just referenced. We'll put that up on the screen. I guess the question is, if it's been negative since 1984, are the candidates to blame? Is it their messaging, or is the media looking to pick at that scab?
Well, I think there's a little bit of both going on here. You know, I do think that Watergate and Vietnam changed the relationship between the politician and the press, and the press ever since has been more critical in its perspective on politics. You know, at the same time, we have this polarization, and you had that wonderful tape out of Montana about people's reaction to the body slam, and you can see that we are polarized, and a lot of that's working its way into our political discourse. So it's more negative, but the press is really concentrating on what's going wrong.
You know, Professor, we love to claim that we yearn for more substance. There's a pie chart in your analysis of the 2016 election which says that the coverage was 42% in the 2016 race about the horse race nature of this. Only 10% of the coverage was on policy. Do we really want policy coverage, or do we just say that?
Well, I think to a degree we do say that. I mean, you know, you do surveys and people say they'd like to hear more about the issues, and then they do the issue coverage and we don't pay very much attention to it. But to me, the striking thing about the coverage in 2016 was that how much these policy and leadership controversies, how big they were in the coverage. They got more than twice as much coverage as did the substantive policy issues. In Hillary Clinton's case, her emails got about 4 times the coverage of what she was saying on all of the issues of the campaign, domestic and international. And she said a lot about the issues, so it wasn't as if she wasn't talking about them. but the press was concerned primarily about her emails.
Shifting now to President Trump's first 100 days, we'll put another graph on the screen that shows that 80% of the coverage has been negative. He never had a honeymoon, and the viewers can see that really puts him at odds with his predecessors. Is that in and of itself indicative of bias, that 80% of his coverage was negative?
Well, again, you know, if you look at the chart, Obama is the one exception, the one president who did get a honeymoon from the press in the first 100 days. The other three on the chart did not. But it's not an indicator of bias. Again, it's an indicator of negative bias. The press is looking for what's going wrong with an administration. And what you see when you look at Trump's first 100 days, it is more negative than Clinton's or George W. Bush's. But you know, this has been a tough 100 days. I think even if you asked Donald Trump, would you like to do it all over again, I think he'd say yes, let's restart the clock. So this has been a very rough 100 days, and I think the press coverage reflects that.
And to your point, if you roll out a travel ban and it gets stymied by the courts, or if you campaign on a pledge of repealing and replacing Obamacare and you can't get that deal done despite the control of both houses of Congress, that gets reported negatively, but that doesn't mean it's biased. It's factual, right?
No, that's true. And if you look, Fox News was one of the 7 outlets that we looked at in our coverage of the first 100 days. And if you look at Fox coverage of the health care issue and of the immigration issue, it's also overwhelmingly negative. There wasn't very much good news for Donald Trump in those two issues during the first 100 days. So to some degree, the press is reflecting what's going on out there. But again, there's a selectivity to focus primarily on what's going wrong rather than also what might be going right.
And finally, we just put on a screen a graph that shows those 7 outlets and overall the coverage that they've had for President Trump. And people can see CNN is at the top of the list, and NBC and CBS and The Times. But Fox News, 52-48 by a more narrow margin. But this needs to be underscored. I'll say it this way. Even the coverage from Fox was more negative than positive of President Trump.
No, that's true. And, you know, Fox did find some silver linings in the first 100 days. So one reason that it came close to being positive, they paid a lot more attention to kind of the economic trends since Trump took over the Oval Office. And the other thing they did, they underplayed the Russia connection. So Fox gave less than half as much attention as the other outlets to the possibility of Russian involvement in the 2016 election.
Professor Patterson, thank you. I encourage viewers to Google the Shorenstein Center and actually read these studies for themselves. They're fascinating and full of good data. Thank you, sir.